It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. This is Lynn Johnson-Langer. I had the privilege of sitting across from her at dinner last night, and a very interesting career. She actually both launched her career at NIH, and she just recently returned to NIH. But in the interim, among other things, she spent 17 years at Johns Hopkins, where she served at different roles as Director of Enterprise Entrepreneurship and International Programs. And she also worked at several biotechs before she founded an organization called Bioplan Associates, which is a life science strategy management and consulting firm. So this talk will be quite different than the last two that you just saw. This will be focused primarily on leadership, and she'll share her pearls of wisdom regarding the leadership skills and qualities and requirements that it takes to be successful as an entrepreneur.
I came in not really knowing what to expect, and last night I had the opportunity to talk to many of the speakers for today, and I have to say it's an impressive group. I really have always felt that chemistry was something to be afraid of. and I started my career as a microbiologist because I thought chemistry was too hard. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit today on a different approach. My focus in my career has really been on leadership. And how do we get those leaders developed so that they can get these discoveries out of the laboratory and to the patient? So we'll talk a bit about that. We'll talk about the paradox of biotechnologists, in that how many of you went into your career thinking that you wanted to cure cancer or do something good for humanity? Yeah, a lot of you. And how many of you are here thinking that you'd like to be an entrepreneur? Some of you, maybe half of you. So the paradox, though, that we've discovered of biotechnologists is that in order to get these discoveries to market, you really have to go think very financially, just as we were hearing at the end of the last speaker talking about the amount of money and the amount of time. In order to really develop a product, you're going to have to meet certain financial milestones. We'll hear from our venture capitalists later in the day. And that's different than trying to save humanity. And we'll look at some evidence of not just these kinds of stories that are case studies or lived experience, but what does the research and the evidence say? Oops. I just want to tell you briefly about what brought me full cycle back to the NIH. I started my career as a microbiologist, decided I didn't want to stay in the lab, went and worked with different biotech companies. In addition, along the way, I picked up an MBA. But really, it was always that goal, that dream of mine, that it's ultimately we're trying to do good, right? So I started a company called Bioplan Associates that works with early stage all the way through major corporations on how to develop the leadership so that they have the skill set necessary to move these ideas through. I went to work, though, at Johns Hopkins after I taught a class for them that they'd invited me to teach. And I discovered then, whoa, lo and behold, teaching was the favorite part of my day. So I ended up staying at Hopkins and going into developing and creating master's degrees. One in particular that you might find relevant is the Master's of Biotechnology, Enterprise, and Entrepreneurship, which is really focused on how do you do just exactly what we're talking about today. It's a science-based program that works all the way through to commercialization. I ultimately became dean there, overseeing these programs where I never thought I wanted to do before. And NIH has the Foundation for the Advanced Education in the Sciences. That was created 60 years ago by NIH researchers who decided that the fellows, the postdocs, all of the researchers really needed educational opportunities. So they recruited me to come back and to oversee to bring their educational programs more into the 21st century. I know, Michelle, you mentioned that scientist article that just came out the other day. NIH is putting term limits now on lab chiefs. They cannot, starting next year, they can only be there 12 years because something like 70 out of 250 have been there more than 2 decades, right? So, what are we going to do to foster innovation and success? So if you're thinking that you want to have your brilliant idea moved through, your target all the way come out to be at the other end helping a patient, then there's some truths that we know. Scientists are most innovative when they are given autonomy, when there's interdepartmental communication. Remember, one of you just said it takes a team, right? It's not just any one person. As well as you need a culture that can foster at least a little bit of failure. So these are things that have long been known. But just as we said, I know you said 90%, my numbers say 95%, but it's a big number, right? And part of that extra 5%, I think, comes from the numbers of biotech firms that fail before we even really know they exist, right? So that's discouraging. We know why. You can guess why. It's expensive. Talk about removing barriers to entry. There's huge barriers to entry. It's very time-consuming. It's very expensive. The science often fails. You know, it doesn't get through the clinical trials. And one thing I'm really going to push today is this inability of scientists to let go. I mean, we were just hearing about find somebody you trust to take care of your baby. Your baby. How are you going to really let go of that? And that, if you're not able to do, is not going to serve you well. Did I turn it off? There we go. Okay, so what have we learned? What has the research shown? What does evidence show about how to be successful? Let go of your ego. That's one of the number one most difficult things to do, one of the easiest things to say, and yet it is, you know, we all experience it, right? Something that you can witness almost every day is scientists, and all of you are used to being one of the smartest people in the room, right? You did well in school, you succeeded. And yet, when it comes to the business side of it, the leadership side, the marketing, all of those other things, many scientists think, well, how hard can that be? I'm a chemist, I'm a biochemist, I'm whatever. And I'm even working in drug development. How hard can the business side be? Well, it can be pretty darn hard. And there's a vocabulary and a way of thinking that you need to familiarize yourself with so that you're able to ask the right questions and also to be able to trust that you can let go. It says venture capitalists often want their own management team. I can give you a sort of a case study story of one of our clients a number of years ago. We were working with a VC. The scientist was unable to let go. The venture capitalists wanted to put in their own management team, and that's going to happen more often than not. It was a breakthrough discovery, but the scientist did not want to be the chief science officer. He wanted to be the CEO, and he couldn't let go. And to date, that breakthrough discovery is still on the shelf. It hasn't been developed because he's trying to do it himself, right? So what is this? Peter Vail from Harvard, an organization psychologist, a number of years ago talked about permanent whitewater. And that's what we're in biotech and biopharm. It's always changing. It's fast-paced. Sometimes it's slow. It's always scary. How do you do it? How do you navigate permanent whitewater? Let me go back one more. Yeah, permanent and sometimes dangerous. But if you think about it, if any of you are whitewater rafters, you know you can learn the skills that enable you to navigate, level 5 whitewater. So what I'm encouraging you to do is to get outside your normal comfort zone. It doesn't mean you necessarily have to become the marketing guru. You're not going to have to become the financial guru, but you sure as heck better understand what these steps are. So I'll tell you another case study that we developed. This is a true story, and in fact, the scientist was from MD Anderson. He'd left and come up to the DC area, and he had a great little company. He did seemingly all the right things. He had an executive coach. He built the company from ground up to starting to make product sales. He had about 60 people. What was stumbling him, though, was that he wanted to continue to be the type of leader that was the type that we all know in our labs, in working with each other, that collaborative, sharing around the water cooler. But as the company got bigger and bigger, and we're still very small at 60 people, right? Many of you are from Merck, huge. But he could not evolve his style of leadership. At some point, you need to, as an entrepreneur, you need to be creative and collaborative. But as the company grows, you need to learn to be more directive. You need to know when to be directive, when to be collaborative. So he surrounded himself with experts that, he had a great CMO, he had great people, he had a great finance person, but he ultimately couldn't let go and even trust those very people that he hand chose. He wanted to do it himself. He couldn't evolve from collaborative to decisive. He didn't recognize that communication needs changed. He didn't recognize that communicating to a group of 60 is way different than communicating to your small lab. And he ultimately learned that his best fit was as an entrepreneur. When I went back to him later, when he was really struggling, and it was a big question as whether the board was going to remove him, he organized a sale of the organization. He went back, started another company, and now I believe he's up to his 6th company. He found where he fit in was as the entrepreneur. That was where his heart of hearts was. It wasn't in running a company of 60 or 600 or 6,000. So what I encourage you to do is to think about, where do you fit? It sounds wonderful. Back in the day, back when biotech first started, we all wanted to be a FIPCO, right? Fully integrated pharmaceutical company. I'm going to start it. I'm going to bring it all the way through till we've cured whatever disease and we're selling drugs. That doesn't usually happen. And part of it doesn't happen. Asking yourself, where do I want to be in that chain? Just as our guy from Camelot Pharmaceuticals realized he liked the entrepreneurial part. I told you a little bit about my story just so you could see there's such an evolution from microbiologist all the way back to NIH, but not only, but in charge of all of the educational needs. I found where I fit, and it takes a while. You don't just take one step and you know. So, leadership requirements in permanent whitewater. You need a visionary leader who is consistently able to articulate that vision throughout. You set the vision and you make sure everybody sees you living it and knowing it, and they know what the vision is. A strategic decision maker, in other words, be collaborative when you need to be decisive when you need to be. There's many steps as the organization grows in leadership. A strong communicator. And this one's a little interesting. Cultural differences. As we look around the room, we might see people from different countries, different genders, etc. Cultural differences within an organization are also those differences between the accountants and the finance people and the lab researchers, right? They all think differently. It's all okay. And earlier in my career, I was having this sort of kumbaya moment of, if we just brought everybody together and if they could just have lunch and talk and share, it would all be good. Well, that doesn't work. You've got to really, certainly that's all fine, but you've really got to allow the scientists to be the scientists, respect the business people for the jobs that they're doing, and recognize that there are different personality types that are doing the different functional areas. another really critical thing to remember is that you can be the visionary leader, and you can set what the organization's goals are, whether it's your lab or your entire organization. And you bring the people under you on board, but you have to allow the decisions on how these goals are going to be made at the lowest possible level. The people that are actually going to do the work, let them figure out how they're going to meet their goals. And what you'll get from that is an alignment and a buy-in throughout the organization. So, what do you do to be successful? Number one, continuously learn and adapt to the situation. The farther you want to go along this creative path, you're going to have to change in multiple ways. Like we were saying, it's very different to lead a lab than to lead a small company, than to lead a company of 20, 100, 1,000 people. So if you think you can do it, that's great. But realize you're going to have to change who you are almost daily as you go through that process. So it's pretty self-evident. It's really a continuous evolving loop, because you can't just be one type of leader and do that till the next type of leader. It's just always circling back. So I think we've heard this already. Surround yourself with experts and believe them, trust your lieutenants. The people that you bring in the best. As he was saying previously, bring in people who are smarter than you are, and then trust them to do what they know how to do. Then educate yourself. You don't have to be able to do it. You have to be able to know what questions to ask to be successful. So who are the experts? I know you know the science experts. Those are your colleagues. Those are the people that you've worked with. But also get to know experts in the other areas, consultants. Consider a personal coach to help you think it through. I'm not talking lifestyle coach, but I'm talking about somebody to help you bounce off whatever the current difficulties are. And I've got to tell you, I've coached people from very senior level, large pharmaceutical companies down to 20 people startups, and their problems are the same. So consider getting yourself somebody good that you can talk to and that you can trust. Now, okay. I put this slide, I inserted this slide sort of at the last minute because it's a real mantra for me. John Cotter from Harvard wrote Leading Change. I don't know, I mean, it's been around for 1,000,000 years. I think it first came out in the 90s, well, maybe not a full 1,000,000 years. Came out in the 90s, and then he's written very many iterations of it. I urge you to get it and to read it. It's very simple to read. But he comes up with these steps on how to lead change that are so appropriate in biopharmaceutical and biotech. So I'll quickly run through them. You can read the book. Somebody would probably appreciate if I ended sooner rather than later, since we're way off. But you need to create a sense of urgency. People aren't going to change without feeling that there's a real need. You need a guiding coalition, a group of people that will work with you, that you can trust. You need that vision. We talked about it. You need to create an atmosphere where everybody knows what the vision is. Get the obstacles out of the way. Boy, at FAES, that's all I'm doing now, is trying to remove obstacles to let people do their good work. Short-term wins, especially in drug development, right? It's a long, arduous, expensive process. Celebrate the small wins. Come up with small wins. And then take the afternoon off with your group to celebrate it. Or at the very least, do what you guys do, whatever works in your lab, in your company or organization, but make sure you note those small wins, because if all you're doing is waiting for the billion-dollar drug, you got a long wait. And then anchor it in the culture, so this change is really part of what we're all doing. So one other part I want to make sure to include that we talk about is diversity of thinking. So good decisions require diversity. This has been proven over and over again in research, and I most recently was asked to write a book chapter on on women on corporate boards. So I came up with a lot of this information that wasn't my original work, but you really need to have diversity to make good decisions. Now, why is that? You know your people who you trust and you think you can make good decisions. But if you don't have separate opposing opinions or other opinions, then it was just like we were hearing, challenge, don't just look for the right answer. Look for why the right answer might not work. And that comes from diversity. So, I don't think I need to say anything, do I? Diversity means people who don't look like you. There is evidence and proof that there is an increase in the bottom line with the number of more diverse people on corporate boards. It enhances your company image. There's been shown to be fewer lawsuits, and the company is viewed as more socially responsible. So while you're putting together your company, give this some thought. Don't just go with your old best buddies, because your old best buddies often look like you. Even if let's rephrase it, so they often think like you. So they may be a different color or a different gender, but if you've all been in it together all along, then you've got this culture of thinking alike. So this is just some stats that I found. One woman on a board significantly decreases a company's chance of going out of business. This was just one, right? Out of Fortune 500 companies, 3 or more women on the board showed a 73% higher return on sales, an 83% higher return on equity, and 112% higher return on invested capital. So it's not just to feel good, and it's not just to look good. It will increase your bottom line. So in biotech, we're slow, and I can't get over why. Why are we slow? We're smart, we're innovative, we're always thinking outside the box, and yet we don't really, in the life sciences, even though more women start, there's very fewer at the top. So think about in your organization why that is, and if you can make that change, I would recommend it. Okay. So back to the beginning a bit. This unique paradox that I was talking about. Many of you, we go into a field because we like it, we find we're attracted to chemistry or biology or whatever, but we also think, we want to cure cancer. We want to do the greater good. And yet, when you get into an organization or when you're trying to bring your product all the way through the pipeline, it's different. It's going to be a different day. And you're going to have financial milestones, and it's not going to be what you thought you were starting. So think about, where do you want to fit in there? And it's often difficult, I've seen this over and over again. So, get people that you trust. And learn to trust people that don't necessarily look like you or sound like you. So the success factors: continuously learn and adapt. Don't stay the same. If you do, you won't be successful. Surround yourself and listen to experts. Include diversity of opinions. And then I'm going to throw it out there because I'm an educator now. Take a workshop, do a certificate. You've got plenty of degrees. Maybe all you need is just something to really help you understand what goes beyond what you're such an expert in. Because it's all about knowing the right questions to ask. So I guess we can't have questions now, but we'll get them later. Thank you very much.